was going to break down some very important stereotypes in the minds of black people and white people. Anne Braden, in December of 1962, in The Southern Patriot, I quote her, and she says about us, quote, "Most important, as Negro and white students consciously walked together down the streets of those little country towns, those images Sherrod talked about are broken. The immediate effect may be fury from some whites and fear from some Negroes, but the images will never be the same," unquote. Now, in a little while, I also understood that there was a more pragmatic reason for bringing northern white people into the freedom movement in the South, and that was because potentially we could attract media attention and possibly federal intervention. And remember, this is 2 years before the Mississippi Potomac crisis. So what happened was I was welcomed in the Albany movement, deeply welcomed. When I canvassed and was traveling around, and most often I was working with black women, that was considered safer and less inflammatory, although it certainly made us very visible. There's a report that I found that there was an incident that I remembered of when I walked up onto an elderly woman's porch with 2 black co-workers, and this elderly lady got up and offered me her chair, only me. And this was, of course, really disturbing to me. I did not take her chair. I found a report that was written to the SNCC office in Atlanta by Peggy Dammond, who's here in the audience. And in that report, she said, I quote, "Penny expressed dismay at this, but we later all realized the value that had occurred by Penny's refusal. This is perhaps one small bit of progress that lady will not forget." So my job was to not take that chair. My job was to clear the table, do the dishes. And was that useful? Maybe. Was there more violence in the black community because of my presence and the presence of my white male civil rights, other white civil rights workers who were male? We all know that there was there was violence. There was huge amounts of violence that happened against anybody who resisted. Whether the presence of white people increased that violence or not, I don't know. It's possible. I do know that Mama Dolly Raines, who was a wonderful lady who fed and housed SNCC workers in Lee County, out in the vicinity, out in the rural county around Albany, who was a midwife who had delivered 1,000 babies in that community, and who would guard her house with a shotgun, sitting at her window. She asked the SNCC project to have me move from her house because the threats that were coming into her were too intolerable. So, that does say a lot. The other thing I would say about violence is that as a white woman, I was more protected than any of my black co-workers or the white male civil rights workers. I was often arrested. I was shoved around roughly. There was one time my clothing was ripped. I was threatened all the time. But in all my 3 years in SNCC, I was never really beaten. I was in a house that was shot into. I was in a van that got rolled by a white mob. So my white woman status didn't protect me completely, but I was different. I mean, and in jail I was segregated and isolated. And so, although Rutha will say she had a good time in jail, I remember hearing my black SNCC and movement comrades being brutalized in jail on the other side of the wall. And I remember listening to the same thing going on with my white male SNCC coworkers. And thank God we could sing and we could hear each other when we sang. A little bit about publicity. There was a lot of publicity about white people who came south. 1 minute. Okay. All right. Well, there was a lot of publicity, and there was one headline that always made me cringe, and it was "White Girl in Seething Mire of Hate." So I did struggle to find my place in the movement. We had long staff meetings talking about our issues. I remember at one point that I wanted to be back in Albany, doing direct action and not voter registration out in the rural counties. And I'm going to read you a quote from Kathleen Conwell, who is not with us anymore, but this is also from her report. I told Penny that if she felt a commitment pulling her to go back to Albany, she should do that, because the need for direct action seemed terribly pent up inside Penny and in need of release for her own satisfaction and discovery of her role. Further conversation showed Penny's slow but much surer commitment to her county and voter registration. It strikes me as though we're not really a conflict between the two areas. Rather, it was a feeling of not being needed as a white student, a sense of frustration that made direct action more appealing. I'm really struck by Kathleen's thoughtfulness, the fact that apparently we spent valuable time on my issues. I think Kathleen was right. It was not clear early on how I fit in. I was an experiment, and we were making it up as we went along. And it was